Okay. So
Okay.
what I was saying is that obviously people want to know what's going on with why these changes. And oh, that was cool. And those changes kind of seem arbitrary, but those of you who have been making those have been getting different results. And that's the important thing. Just doing, Christy had said yesterday, um, she said, my gosh, just changing my arms and doing movements of peace. And it was a correction I had made there. She said, my gosh, that's so much easier. Okay. So, millimeters make a difference, angles make a difference. Um, and that's a part of the big process. And so some of the reasoning, like when we were talking about movements of peace, particularly movements of peace, because that's the place where you can see most of the changes occurring. And in the movements, by just changing the tempo, okay, changing the tempo from 6 beats per movement to 3, it speeds it up, obviously. But that creates a different rhythm, and that creates a different flow, and that's an important thing. And the primary difference is, well, why did you drop it down? Is when we were doing it at 6, it was much more for meditation, to become a meditative and discipline producing exercise. Okay, so obviously there were health benefits to it as well, but we were really, my objective with that was to put you into a state of meditations and to open up the possibility of transforming and transfiguring the body through that. And I was doing it based on old experience. And as new experiences became, so movements of peace technically was integrated in 2000. So, here we are 22 years later, and we're really changing it. And its reasoning was based on what I knew before I did Holy Sound, what I knew before my third near-death experience, things like that. So as we progress in our own timelines, we say, okay, that really worked. And I've got 22 years of actually using this format, plus another decade of using its precursor format. So I understand, and not to mention all the students that did all these things, you can really see a difference by simple changing of tempo, simple changing of how the arms move, adding the quadrupedal stuff to it so that, we act as tetrapods versus muscling it with our legs, And when you learn at certain points on the continuum, you lock into the operative premises of the time. Okay, so Steve's like really asking a lot, well, what about your hips? And, your hips need to do this and your legs power that. And not so much when you switch modes to go into the tetrapod mode where you're moving as much from your hands and we're trying to get a position of nothingness. Okay, physicality of we should feel light. We're moving into tensegrity. We're really integrating that model more. Okay, that turns out to produce more energy because when we're not using the muscles, we end up not burning up energy. Okay, and that gets us closer to the new operation, which is how to move, using those principles of CHOP, as I call it. Okay, the principles of God, as I say in the book, God's authority, God's love, but also we could just say of the energy of the Tao. If you want to be into a nondescript, non-religious connotation, or being in the flow of the universe. But the principles, the four principles of that are still the same. You have clarity, you have harmony, you have order, and you have purity. Okay? And when you're applying those to motion, that in some ways is easier to comprehend, but in other ways it gets a lot more abstract, and it's understandable. So if we talk about what is clarity in the act of a movement, and the first part of clarity is its purpose. What is the purpose of this movement? If you do not have the right purpose, then you don't have the right intention. But primarily, if you don't have the right purpose, then you don't have the right movement vectors. Okay? So if we take a question of like, well, why aren't you using the legs and hips? Okay, that's a pretty solid error in Tai Chi now, to my way of thinking, is because it's using force. We're not supposed to use any kind of force, even from our own bodies. So if we're pushing and we're powering everything from the musculature system, we are not only wasting energy in the Qigong aspect, but we are violating the principle of not using force and going with the flow. Okay, but that comes because there was no clarity of purpose. Our clarity at that time, what we're thinking about, is we need to move the body and we need to use the muscles, and in this way we're using less energy and less muscles, but we were still using muscles. Secondly, the hand motions and the applications, especially in Tai Chi form, okay, weren't very clear. Thus, they were glitches. The patterns were broken. So as you work with that, you then have to say, oh, as you get more clarity as to the what and why you are doing things and how the body moves, then suddenly you change and get those couple different vectors. And a couple millimeters here, a couple millimeters there, a couple angle changes here, okay? And then suddenly you can feel the difference, okay? But feeling and knowing are two different things. So you have to have that clarity of the purpose. So that was much easier to get from when you have the martial arts aspect, okay? Especially when you're working with the combatives, is those years we were spending Fridays just knocking around. Okay, we all learned a lot about angles, and we all learned about how not to use effort, where the center is, how the center of gravity really moves, okay? Especially in the close range stuff, okay? We learned what the secret yang was about and the differences between that and these physically based Tai Chi systems, okay? So in learning that and perfecting those moves, suddenly we have more energy. We are using less energy, and we are gaining energy within ourselves. So, as the purposes became more defined, the effort became less. The resistance became less. The connection became more. Okay? So the clarity of purpose is very much important. If you believe something is a push, then you're going to waste energy on that movement. But if you believe everything is a spiral, you're going to gain energy. So we have to come out of the linear thinking of not only how the body moves, but how applications work. Okay? And we're much more doing this rather than doing this. So when the force comes, we spin it in its position. We were giving up ground, okay? And in giving up ground, we gave up the center. And in giving up the center, we lost our center. And we started operating with different physicalities. And in doing that, we were wrong. We missed opportunities. From my point of view, missed years of opportunities. Okay? It's like, man, wish I knew that 22 years ago. I wish I had me as a teacher in 1980. Okay, me now, not me 10 years ago. So you can waste decades doing something wrong, and then suddenly you're 60 something years old and you're saying, why is my body degenerating? Shouldn't my, and and not so bad for me, although it is, but I see some of these other Tai Chi people that are really old because they were really doing it wrong. At least I was like 75% there. What you used to think I was much closer to there, but then there moved out quite a bit. As there moves out, it's kind of interesting where you end up. It's like, I tell Rick now he's a Republican. Your party goes left enough, boy. Suddenly you're skirting the line on the other side. Okay? So that clarity of purpose is very, very important. The knowing what you are doing is important. And we spend a lot of time not doing that because we don't want to fixate on that too much. But that was another error as me being a teacher. It's like, no, you need to fixate on this a little bit more. You need to challenge the students in level 1. Give them a higher standard to aspire to. Give them the new models. Make them work with the new models. So in doing that for a couple of years, I noticed 2 things. One, I have no students. And okay. And, 2, it worked. The students who did it changed. They got much more benefit. Okay. Now, they don't know a lot of stuff that all of us older people take for granted because we've been with the system and we have all this history. But, there's a point there where you don't care what Windows 5 was anymore. Okay, where are they in Windows, 11 or 12 or something? Okay. What? Yeah.
I think it's 11, yeah.
So you don't care what Windows 5 was, or the glitches of it, or its positivity. It just was so wrong. Okay, you go and use it, it's like, my gosh, were we off? All right, and then we go back to MS-DOS, where you used to have to type in commands. Okay, so that's what it's like with Tai Chi as well, is as your knowledge and your clarity grows and your precision grows, you can accomplish more for less energy, less effort. Okay, so that's part of what we're doing. So clarity is the most important thing. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And committing a little bit to changing yourself to adapt more to where it should be, the standard. Okay, so then the next part is harmony. Okay, and harmony in the movements basis is literally how the tissues work together. Okay, so whenever we're having resistance, we're not having harmony. Now, harmony, as I have always talked about using the orchestra model, is you can have a bunch of different instruments, playing their different parts, and you have this beautiful composition because everybody is playing with each other and they're harmonizing. But they're not necessarily connected because they're all playing different things. Well, so is your body. Your body's doing the same thing. Your liver has its purpose. All these things are working. And in truth, there is no natural harmony in the body. Okay? Because liver cells are going to be doing different things, and everything is going to be doing different things, and their timing is going to be different. And as you use them, it's going to be different. When your stomach is full, systems all change. Okay? It's like, okay, breathing diminishes because the stomach's in the way of the lungs, and you get all sorts of things that happen. Okay, you're expending a lot of energy in digestion. There's more peristalsis. So the body shifts around its priorities as you do things throughout the course of the day. Your circadian rhythm kicks in. Neurological system works differently. Okay, weather, external influences, all these start to change the harmony of your body. And a lot of times it knocks it out so that you feel it. So there is no real natural harmony to the body. And that was a premise that I had difficulty giving up, because when you're in alternative wellness and all these other things, you always say, hey, if you do everything right, your body will naturally go back to the way it's supposed to be. No, it doesn't. It doesn't always go back. Sometimes the damage is irreparable. Okay? But it can harmonize and it can work well together. All right? And that's what we're really looking about at the basic level of harmony. But when we start to look at the systems within the systems, is where we can start to get to more common ground. So as I always say, if you edit down enough, you find the commonality and the common principles between things. Using the connective tissue network, using the methods that we were developing, finding the tetrapod concept and the quadrupedal movement, all those kind of things brings more of a core. But the biggest place where we do all work together is on the harmonic level, okay, or what people would say the energy level. Now, I reluctantly do not use energy anymore or frequencies, okay, because these waveforms we're working with are like voice prints, okay? So a good way of looking at it is if we all sang the Star Spangled Banner or Happy Birthday, okay, most of us aren't going to even be in the same key. Okay, we're going to just pick the way that we can sing it the best, and we're just going to be musically a disaster. But everybody's part will be recognizable. Okay? So harmony doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be such that it recognizes. Now, where's that going? Well, if we sing a couple more verses, each one of us will start to adjust the way we are singing. Okay? And we are starting to come to a better form of music. Okay? Because we recognize, that first thing is we recognize what we're doing. Okay, so suddenly Kathy says, oh, I need to be a little higher on, hap. and Rick says, whoa, I need to be lower on P. Happy. Okay, and after a few more verses of this, you start really coming together and it's like sounding like something. Okay, and you're relating on different frequencies. You may not be capable having the skills to come together to be perfect. perfect unison. But you have the power to adjust to enough where you have radically improved the situation. Okay? So, in harmony then, to get harmony, you also have to have order. Okay? And that order, that structural order, helps you each to adjust from just being recognizable to starting to move to unison. Okay? So much of what we're doing when we're establishing order is we are establishing the order through the movement process. Okay, how we do the movements. Okay, so now you see the relationship. The purpose influences the order, the structure, because form follows function. Okay, so as we start to work on the form and the order of sequences at first and then tissue movement, we then start to get much better on the sounds, the harmonics we're producing. We can never in the body get perfection. We get a percentage of perfection. Okay, it's like when Bob Monroe used to talk about the brain waves. Okay, he'd say your focus 10. If you got focus 10 that's happening 12 times a minute, you're in a heavy-duty altered state because your brain activity is so sporadic, but every so often, here's that focus 10 handprint. Here's that focus 10 handprint. 12 times, you're great. 30 times, you can levitate objects. Okay? 50 times, you're a saint. Okay? 50 times per minute. Now, that doesn't sound like much. Well, that sounds like a lot. Okay? But considering 1 million functions, no, not much at all. So it's just a real minor ordering of the brain patterns that gives you huge power. Okay? So every time we do a loop, let's say on movements of peace, and that loop gets more and more ordered, more and more refined, so that the hands aren't doing something separate from the forearms aren't doing something separate from the legs. As this stuff is starting to feel much more like one rather than 1, 2, 3, or 1 to 100. So many of you are still moving as if you're doing a sequence and you're counting it out. Okay, this is a 3-second thing. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. No, no. And then stop and go on. No, it's got to be fluid and more fluid and more fluid that just happens to hit at that 3-second mark. So just doing a push out and a drop in and getting 3 seconds and just smoothing that out changes everything. It changes your brainwave patterns. It changes your breathing. It changes everything. It starts bringing everything online. All right? So you have to work on the harmony by, one, having your clarity of what you're doing, what's the most effective way to do it, the order of stopping the sequences of 1 to 100 different movements down to one movement. All right, everybody push. Okay? Everybody pull. Okay? And get that down from your toes to your fingertips. Okay? From your toes to your nose. The tip of your tail to the tip of your nose. And one fluid motion. So that's how you work on the order and the harmony. Then the harmony creates a different harmonic, a different resonance, so that each movement has its own signature. Okay, so it's no longer a bunch of arms and a bunch of cells. it starts becoming a wave. Okay? And that's where we move into the purity. Okay? Is a wave, one wave, and then this whole wave moves through the sequence. It never ends. And that's what I'm talking about with when we follow our thumbs doing form. Okay, if you're always seeing that thumb when you're moving, and you're always moving relative, you can see everything and you can feel everything moving at the same space and time as your thumb. And yeah, at first it's like, oh, well, I'm really off on that one. But then after a while, you can start to feel everything moving and you get that movement more in there. So you're looking for purity, literally looking for purity. Okay? You can see it. You can see when it's all there. The nervous system does need to see. It needs to hear. The nervous system is sensory. So your sensory gives you your feedback, not the resistance in your muscles. So stop trying to feel it being correctly and see it correctly. See the purity in what you're doing. Because as long as you're feeling it, you're getting into resistance. And as you start to see more, you will start to perceive it other ways in your sensory system through the simple touch stretch reactors and all these other different nerves that you have. You'll feel it differently. You never consider how you taste something. It just happens. You never consider how your eyes process what you see until they don't. Okay? And it's the same thing. You never measure your digestion, except when it's not working. So when things are working, you don't pay much attention to it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's kind of the attitude that you get by doing repetitions. Which brings us to another part about harmony. Okay, is you have to do enough repetitions to establish the habitation wave. Okay, the habitation response. And some of you have forgotten what that is, and some of you never learned it. Okay, is the habitation response happens, is like if we're doing just this move, and then suddenly you don't have to think about it anymore, and it does itself. Okay, that means your cerebellum has picked up the rhythm of the pattern, and it's now taken it over for you. And that's what the runner's high is all about, because as soon as that happened, it creates the dopamine link. All right, once the cerebellum takes over a movement, it then produces dopamine. Now, that happens in music as well. Okay, any pattern that you do, whether it's crocheting, okay, bell ringing, data entry, honestly, that's a hard thing to do it. But let's say you had to do 10,000 entries of the same number. Your fingers would be just doing it.
You would develop a duplicate key.
Right. But you see the point? It would be just habitation at that point. And when you're doing that habit, your brain releases dopamine. So you get a little bit more of the idea of addiction here too. Okay, why we become behaviorally addicted as well. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this habit. Why do you have the same thoughts over and over again and you can't shake them? You're actually creating a habitation response on the thought and getting off on the chemical reaction. Good or bad, doesn't matter, because your brain doesn't assess good or bad. Okay? The roller coaster is either pleasurable or it's painful, but chemically it's the same thing. Your overview determines whether it is, and the brain just says, hey, I love this. So why do people who are terrified of roller coasters get on them again? Is because brain says, hey, I love this, even though their mind is saying, I'm going to die. All right? Very simple stuff. Chemical addictions, not much fun. But we get through now this process, okay, of continually fine-tuning it. And that habitation response is important because it's giving you the chemicals that your brain is thriving for. And that will motivate you to keep doing this. Okay? Unless, of course, there's a pattern that's stronger than this. Okay? And you get to that point where you think, oh, there's no pattern stronger than this. Yeah, there is. That's when you're seeking your need for novelty. The need for novelty is far more stronger pattern. Hey, I'm bored. Okay, so I'm starting to work up to that level where here I am in my cave, okay, where I can just like remember I showed you that video of all those Eastern Orthodox priests meditating in caves and praying in caves. And those Russian Orthodox people would actually get, they'd brick them into their little cells, and they only knew they died when they weren't taking their water anymore. Well, I guess he died. Okay, let's put in those last bricks before he stinks. So they provide balance to the world, because without that distraction, just imagine what that would be like. Is you just go over, and all you do every time you're breathing, you're saying a prayer. Okay? Is you create so much energy. And it's energy that doesn't work on the human children of men, but it does. It changes their field. You get enough of those people doing this, and suddenly everybody's different, making different decisions. They're changing the planet. But not anymore. Okay, because we become stimulus junkies. We need more people in caves. Praying. Achieving balance. But you can't do that until you begin to do it in yourself. So, if you take the novelty away, you won't seek it. All right? It's so much easier to lose weight when there's no food around. And someone brings it to you. And the moldy bread looks good all of a sudden. Okay, God knows what those Ukrainians were eating in the bottom of that factory. Worms, all sorts of things. So where you get to, by being in isolation, you either die from it or you transcend it. And you live in this world that we cannot comprehend. And yet you can, because it's like I said, the fever dream, okay, where you just move from one out-of-body experience to another, okay, you're just always doing it. This is when St. Nicholas was in prison, was his highest rates of miracles, his bilocation, because basically he's chained to a wall all day. What's he got to do? Pray, meditate. Then what happens? The chemistry of his brain changes. The functionality, the order, the harmony, every aspect. So he's getting to this point of purity, to the point where ships are sailing at sea in a storm, and suddenly there's this light in the sky. This man is in the sky and he guides them to port. What can you do astrally if your body is restricted? Who knows how much the people in comas are saving the planet? Who knows how much the people with Alzheimer's may be saving the planet? When you put it in that perspective. Because just because we can't connect to them doesn't mean that their true self is not connected. And just because a person can't think in human terms, symbolically, doesn't mean they're out of communication with the loop. We evaluate things from false measures. So what is the heart mind doing? Well, that person's brain doesn't function anymore. Okay? It's still online. It's still working according to the bigger plan, the plan that we cannot know. And that is the same way with ourselves, is we tend to push upon ourselves limitations that we have learned in our world. Okay? How much does your behavior suppress your cellular actions? Well, we know that if you eat bad food and you have diarrhea, and that was a choice, and then you go back and do it again because it felt so good chemically in your brain, you can't help yourself. Okay, so once a week you get diarrhea, but hey, then you rationalize and say, well, it's good for you. It cleans me out. Okay? That's how humans are. It's like they'll rationalize anything to keep doing something that they like. And rationalize anything to not do what they should. Okay? So we got to cut the rationalization out, because if you look at it of how many intestinal cells you killed by doing that process and stressed out, you might say, whoa, I'm a really bad person for killing all those cells. I say, they'll just recover. But then suddenly, when your gut doesn't work anymore, okay, because you've been doing this for so long that your cells can't reproduce because there's too many adhesions in there, okay, you don't blame yourself, you blame the doctor for the diagnosis. Okay, it's like you're just like your dumb dog who goes out and eats crap and gets a stomach infection. Well, eventually they're going to do that, and there's going to be so much damage in there, they're not going to recover. And the infection's going to take them out. That's the biggest problem with us as being elders. Is there anybody here not an elder? No, there's not. Okay. Is that we forget every year you're losing lung cells. Every year you're losing brain cells. Every year you're losing intestinal cells. So suddenly you're surprised when things don't work anymore. Okay? If you managed it better, you wouldn't be losing those cells. Because you can reestablish the environment so that those cells don't die. If you did more activity in your brain. So when I'm talking about the movements of peace, and I have this regeneration system, and I have this whole little lecture on how do you regenerate, it's real. You want to stave off the memory losses. You want to stave off the intestinal losses. You want to stave off the liver losses. Those genes that produce genetic diseases don't function if the environment is not stressful. They only turn on when you stress the environment. So if you build it through the regeneration process, through your breathing process, if you do your breathing process, you're going to redevelop your lungs.
So is the benefit of the movements of peace versus, say, doing form, the fact that it's shorter, and it gives you more opportunity to do repetitions that helps bring your body into harmony?
Yes.
Okay.
It's about repetitions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
now, the problem is with that is, yes, you have to do repetitions to build, but you can't go too far that you do repetitive motion injury.
Right.
That the action you do is stressful. So that is why Tai Chi form is good. Okay? So what we do is we take a bigger hunk. All right? It's like, say, movements of peace is a scale, a musical scale, and you play that over and over again. You do your 12 motions, okay, which is your 12 notes. Okay, so you do that over and over again. All right, you get good at it, but then it's also boring, and at a certain point, you're going to start hurting yourself. But now, if we create a song, which is the form, then we have less repetitions of the same thing, so less risk of repetitive motions, except for swing theory, that is, and more opportunity to work on order, to work on harmony. So I keep telling you, you want to make that form as if it's a perpetual motion wave. Okay, so that's why people never master it, is no one ever goes there. Okay, and we do go there when we do level 4. Because that's a place where we can comprehend, and as you were saying, Rick, it's easier. Okay, it's just I can get in these rhythms and then I can do them over and over and over because I'm creating a perpetual motion. And you could go through one side of that level 4 and just like, holy crap, that was so much fun. I don't even feel that. And the reason that you were doing level 4 was to teach you how to do your level 2 form. Level 2 form should feel like a level 4. And level 4 should do it. So if you want to know what you're doing, if you want to, let's say, go into healing yourself, yes, we want to do movements of peace. And if you don't want to master the level 2 form, okay, that we're doing now, the new master form, then do level 4.
So I had another question in terms of the, in this case specifically in movements of peace, sort of the introduction of tension in order to, I guess, the maybe you want to understand the purpose of introducing the tension. So I'll use a very specific example. So when we're coming back in, I was coming in kind of like this, and you were saying, no, come in like this. And then when you go up, you find that you have to release your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the surface, that sounds like exactly the wrong thing to do. But talk to me about then how that evolves.
Oh, okay. Well, it evolves by, of course, lengthening the tissues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you're coming in from here and you're moving into this position, okay, obviously that turning is going to feel bad. So if bit by bit you work towards it, okay, suddenly it just kind of happens and it starts becoming more outward. All right, so these tissues will elongate, well, on here, and then the natural move then is once you're there, is that'll just flip. Okay, so if you keep coming in, it'll flip because you start to work on, well, how do I do this? Okay, because in your mind, you're not using actually enough tissue. You're using little muscles here, and you're doing muscles, and you're not using the whole band of all of this. You're still thinking of it as bones, and you're still thinking about it as muscles. And you have to say there is, how could that be fluid? And then suddenly you start loosening up everything. And then you say, well, just like you do in level 4, is your tissues then start to know the pattern, so they start moving. Some of them who are no longer needed on this task of getting you in start to do the direction change. So somewhere between there, the direction changes happens, and you don't even know why.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have repeated it enough that the system knows, okay, we got to lengthen everything here. So you guys here need to relax more. Okay, and you guys here, instead of being in resistance to it, open up. Change your spacing. Okay, so a lot of times when we're thinking linear and muscular, we can't go any further because these muscles, you think muscles here. But within each one of these is cells that can separate. And they can release that tension so that instead of changing your structure, you now start to rotate within it. And that's what I keep saying is allow your cells to move around your bones. And eventually allow the bones to move around themselves. Okay? And that's another thing we keep forgetting. And actually, it's not that we forget so much, is we develop adhesions within our bones. Our bones are actually very flexible. Okay, that's a big problem with children. Okay, you can do anything with their bones. They're almost like plastic, a hard plastic. Okay, and as you do repetitive tasks, your bones get harder. They develop adhesions and they develop more cells in stressful points. If you stress a bone more in one spot, it's going to develop more bone. And we actually take the elasticity out of it. And senior citizens do that too. You actually have this accumulation of scar tissues within your own bones. So how do you reestablish the plastic? Well, obviously not just sitting down. Okay? You have to get the cells within the bones to start to recruit, to reestablish their plasticity by doing unloaded movement. So it's an interesting oxymoron is the medical profession will say you have to do more weight-bearing exercises. And the reality is you should be doing more plasticity exercises as a senior. Okay, because let the motions create the new cells, not the resistance. So what happens to seniors when they start doing their little 2-pound weights and all that sort of stuff? They tear rotator cuffs. Okay, they go to the swim class and then they come home and they can't use their shoulder anymore. It's like, man, I didn't know that. I got carpal tunnel syndrome now. How did I get that? Never had that all my life. Because you have less cells. When you strain less cells, you kill more cells. And do they recover? Sometimes never. So always remember that is we want to build cells through movement, not through destruction. So that's the big part of movements of peace. So if we talk about movements of peace, level 4, start getting those things on board. Okay, easy processes. And then try to get the flow in the wave. Any other questions?
I've definitely, having done movements of peace now more frequently, I'm definitely realizing all of my stop points in the middle. So that's kind of been interesting. Probably at this point, the thing that I'm working on, they're trying to understand the most is the new hand movements, or arm movements when you're going down and back up. I'm feeling it. The coming back up, I'm feeling more in my back than I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just need to work through that. But
always relax more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. So going up a flight of stairs and I practice this all the time because I have a lot of stairs. And so you are swinging, but
right.
You got to and I try, what I say to myself is don't muscle the foot down, like bam, trotting. But you got to put that foot down and you got to be held up by muscles, right?
Well, yeah, certainly connective tissue and more tendons than muscles, okay, because you want to get that elasticity. So the problem is, specifically for you, is that the shorter your spine gets, okay, the less pliability and energy you can exert through your feet because your legs start to bow. Okay, so reestablishing that length changes the vectors. Okay, so as that gets shorter, you're going to have to use more muscle when you push off your foot than actually changing your weight because your center of gravity gets twisted as your spine gets twisted. Okay, so on one side, you could probably easily swing that pelvis, and then the other side, nothing. So you have to muscle that off. Okay, so that's just the nature of the mechanics of your body. Now, when you reestablish the length, you can adjust your center of gravity so that it could get over the stair on each one, and then the center of gravity is going to pull you. So,
okay.
All right, so one of the things is if your center of gravity can't get over the step in front of you, okay, then your body has to push the pelvis or pull the pelvis to that point. So you have to get that pliability enough so you go up the stair by moving your center of gravity and your body follows. If you don't, then you have to muscle yourself up the stair.
Okay.
So if you think of the stairs as a walking drill,
yes,
and use that instead of looking at it as work and
right.
having to carry your body weight up, it makes a dramatic difference on how your body responds.
Yeah, exactly. And you do that through repetition, but not repetition when you have a short spine.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that with her because I was thinking originally with her question, it's not so much the muscle, it's the frame alignment. Like with you rolling that trochanter underneath you to support you. But I forgot it.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is,
so as the spine twists, it literally pulls the bones of the hips up so they have less mobility and less rotation.
Okay.
So, all the PT is do 10 or 20 or 30, but 3 works just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes much better because the rest of them are negative and creates use of force and even more resistance. So
exactly.
Maybe practicing on 3 steps and maybe sitting down and sliding back down, then do that a couple of times.
Right. And that's a very important point that we have to address with our own work. Okay, as your tissues get trained and you do your wiggles, you don't have to do wiggles for 10 minutes. They all know what they're doing. It's like, okay, next one. Okay, you feel the flow till you don't feel the resistance. And that might be 20 repetitions on one day, and 3 on another day. Okay, so you have to adjust to what's going on. When you train your tissues, you'll need less repetitions. I remember watching this one Qigong master and healer warming up for a session, and he just like, okay, I'm loose. It's like, wait a second, you're supposed to do 10 repetitions of all that. No, my body's perfect. I'm ready to go. My energy's flowing. Okay, so you don't waste energy by doing that Western kind of thinking is, oh, I'm supposed to do 10 repetitions. No, you're supposed to get fluidity and mobility. And ideally, as I was saying, you have clarity. Oh, that's a good clarity. You have purity, you have, harmony, you have the order. You're ready to go. Now, if you can't get those things, don't overdo it. Okay, you do it over time rather than over doing more repetitions. All right, so technically you should do the least amount of exercise you possibly can do.
Yeah, and it's better to adopt that before you can't do anything and have to build back up.
Oh yeah. Once the house of cards crashes, as
Yeah.
we're seeing with Teresa, is once one thing knocks the house of cards down, it's a long struggle to recover. So, anyway, good questions, people. Anything else?
I think instead of doing lots of, everybody gets that Western mentality. It's a repetition. Well, if I do 10 reps, well, if I do 20, I'll be better. But like you said, you get to a point where that's destructive. My way of thinking has been for a while that, well, I do so many, we'll call them practices, like doing musical scales, but then do it through the day, incorporate it in your everyday. So instead of doing 30 repetitions